gonna need all the help we can get.
Let's get to work.
40 years for this.
They called themselves Ghostbusters. According to these hacks, they saved the world. No eyewitnesses. And who is found to carry the torch? Descendants of Egon Spengler. You have a minor hanging indiscriminately.
Has a proton pack.
It's completely safe.
I wouldn't say completely safe.
The Ghostbusters are finished.
Right, well, overruled.
Sustained.
Thank you.
You the weird guy who buys strange old things?
Correct on both counts.
What is it?
Better question is, what's inside of it?
Commanding an army of ghosts. With the power to kill by fear itself.
Like, literally scared to death?
We're gonna need all the help we can get.
Let's get to work.
Can I be of any help? Melnitz in uniform. Yeah.
If there's something strange, if there's something weird,
Ghostbusters, what do you want?
Buster makes me feel good. Makes me feel good.
Heads up. It's all dark and horny at 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
What happens when the Ghostbusters face an enemy so powerful that it can freeze an entire city with a single breath? Ghostbusters Frozen Empire takes the beloved supernatural franchise back to New York and raises the stakes higher than ever before. Packed with ghosts, ancient mysteries, family drama, comedy, and spectacular visual effects, the film brings together the classic Ghostbusters and the new generation in a battle that could turn the world into a frozen wasteland. It is a movie built on nostalgia, but it also tries to create a new future for one of Hollywood's most recognizable franchises, Ghostbusters. Frozen Empire arrived in 2024 as the direct sequel to the successful Ghostbusters Afterlife. The film continued the story of the Spengler family while reuniting audiences with many of the legendary characters who made the original films cultural icons decades ago. The challenge facing the filmmakers was enormous. They had to satisfy longtime fans who grew up with the original Ghostbusters while also keeping younger audiences interested in the newer characters introduced in Afterlife. The story begins with the Spengler family now living in New York City. Instead of operating from a small town setting like the previous film, the action returns to the famous Ghostbusters headquarters. This change immediately gives the movie a different feeling. New York has always been the spiritual home of the franchise. The city's crowded streets, towering buildings, underground tunnels, and endless energy provide the perfect environment for ghostly chaos. The Ghostbusters franchise has always balanced horror, comedy, science fiction, and family adventure. The original 1984 film became a cultural phenomenon because it mixed all these elements in a way that felt fresh and exciting. Over the years, many sequels, cartoons, comics, and games expanded the universe. By the time Frozen Empire arrived, fans had spent decades discussing the franchise, creating theories, sharing memes, and celebrating the adventures of the paranormal investigators. One of the most interesting aspects of Frozen Empire is how it handles legacy. The film is not simply about catching ghosts, it is about generations working together. The older Ghostbusters represent experience and wisdom. The younger characters represent curiosity and innovation. This combination becomes the emotional center of the story. The development of the film began shortly after the success of Ghostbusters Afterlife. That movie surprised many people by earning strong audience reactions and respectable box office numbers. The positive response convinced the studio that there was still significant interest in the franchise. Discussions about a sequel started almost immediately. The creative team wanted the next chapter to feel larger in scale. While Afterlife focused heavily on family themes and nostalgia, the sequel aimed to expand the world and introduce new supernatural threats. The filmmakers explored various ideas before settling on the concept of an ancient force capable of bringing a supernatural ice age. The title itself generated excitement among fans. Frozen Empire suggested something massive and dangerous. The phrase created images of frozen cities, icy ghosts, and apocalyptic stakes. It promised a spectacle different from anything previously seen in the franchise. Returning cast members were essential to the sequel's success. The filmmakers knew audiences had become attached to the Spengler family. The younger actors had received praise for their performances in Afterlife, and their return provided continuity between the films. At the same time, fans wanted to see more of the original Ghostbusters. The challenge was balancing screen time between old and new characters. Too much focus on nostalgia might prevent the newer heroes from growing. Too little focus on the originals might disappoint longtime supporters. This balancing act influenced nearly every creative decision during development. Writers spent considerable time ensuring each major character had a meaningful role within the story. The goal was to create a film where different generations could share the spotlight rather than compete for it. The central idea of a supernatural freezing force also offered exciting visual possibilities. The franchise had explored slime, ghosts, and giant monsters before, but an ancient ice entity presented fresh opportunities for visual storytelling. Entire city blocks could become frozen. Ghosts could emerge from icy prisons. Familiar locations could be transformed into beautiful yet terrifying landscapes. The development process involved extensive brainstorming sessions. Writers explored mythology, folklore, and supernatural legends from various cultures. They wanted the villain to feel ancient and mysterious, rather than simply another ghost. This research helped shape the movie's central threat into something that felt unique within the Ghostbusters universe. As production planning continued, excitement grew among fans. Social media discussions speculate about possible plot details, returning characters, and connections to previous films. Every casting announcement generated headlines and online debate. The anticipation surrounding the project demonstrated the lasting power of the Ghostbusters brand. Even after decades, audiences remained invested in proton packs, ghost traps, and paranormal investigations. Few franchises maintain that level of cultural relevance for so long. The filmmakers recognized this responsibility. They understood they were not simply making another sequel. They were adding a new chapter to a beloved franchise with generations of devoted fans. Every creative choice carried significant expectations. From the earlier stages of development, the team aimed to deliver a movie that felt both familiar and fresh. They wanted audiences to experience the excitement of returning to the Ghostbusters world while also discovering new characters, threats, and adventures. The result would become one of the most anticipated supernatural adventure films of 2024, bringing together nostalgia, spectacle, comedy, and family drama in a story that attempted to honor the past while looking toward the future. Casting has always been one of the most important elements of the Ghostbusters franchise. The original 1984 movie became legendary not only because of its concept but because of the chemistry between its actors. The personalities of the team felt natural, funny, and believable. Decades later, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire faced the challenge of creating that same sense of chemistry while blending multiple generations of characters into a single story. The heart of the new generation remained the Spengler family. After the events of Ghostbusters Afterlife, Phoebe Spengler had become one of the franchise's most beloved modern characters. Intelligent, socially awkward, curious, and fearless, she reminded audiences of her grandfather while still feeling completely unique. The filmmakers recognized how strongly viewers connected with her journey in the previous film, so she became one of the emotional centers of the sequel. Phoebe's role in Frozen Empire is larger and more complex than before. In many ways, she represents the future of the Ghostbusters organization. She possesses incredible intelligence and scientific talent, but she is still a teenager trying to find her place in the world. The movie explores her struggle between following rules and trusting her instincts. This conflict gives the character emotional depth beyond simply chasing ghosts. Trevor Spengler also returns, continuing his evolution from the previous film. While Phoebe often handles the scientific side of ghost hunting, Trevor represents a more adventurous and action oriented perspective. The sequel allows him to become more comfortable in his role as a Ghostbuster. Rather than being the uncertain teenager audiences met earlier, he begins developing confidence in his abilities and his place within the team. Callie Spengler and Gary Gruberson continue serving as parental figures within the story. Their relationship develops further as they attempt to create a stable family environment while living inside one of the world's most unusual workplaces. The filmmakers use their relationship to provide moments of warmth and humor amid the supernatural chaos. One of the most exciting aspects of the casting process involved bringing back the legendary Ghostbusters themselves. Fans had waited years to see these characters working together in meaningful roles again. Their return was not simply fan service. The filmmakers wanted the original team members to actively contribute to the story rather than appear briefly for nostalgia. The presence of veteran Ghostbusters creates an interesting dynamic. The older characters carry decades of experience dealing with paranormal threats. They have faced gods, ghosts, supernatural disasters, and world ending events. Yet they now find themselves mentoring a younger generation that approaches problems differently. This generational contrast becomes one of the film's strengths. The younger Ghostbusters rely heavily on innovation and experimentation. The veterans trust experience and established methods. Sometimes these perspectives clash, other times they complement one another. The interactions between generations provide both comedy and emotional resonance. Casting new supporting characters was equally important. The filmmakers wanted to expand the Ghostbusters universe while introducing individuals who could contribute fresh perspectives. Several new faces joined the story, each bringing unique skills, personalities, and motivations. Some characters are connected to paranormal research. Others have knowledge about ancient supernatural legends. These additions help broaden the scope of the Ghostbusters world. Instead of focusing solely on ghost hunting, the movie explores wider mysteries involving ancient powers and forgotten history. The casting team searched for performers capable of balancing comedy and drama. This balance has always been essential to Ghostbusters. Characters must feel funny without becoming cartoons. They must handle emotional moments without becoming overly serious. Finding actors who can move naturally between these tones is a difficult task. Many of the younger cast members spent significant time preparing for their roles. Although ghost hunting may be fictional, the actors needed to understand how the equipment worked, how their characters would react during paranormal encounters, and how to maintain believable relationships with one another. The proton packs, ghost traps, and other equipment are almost characters themselves within the franchise. Actors had to learn how these devices would theoretically function. This preparation helped create a sense of realisms despite the fantastical subject matter. Another challenge involved creating believable chemistry between actors who came from very different generations. Some performers grew up watching Ghostbusters movies. Others were now working alongside actors who had helped create those iconic films decades earlier. Behind the scenes, many cast members described the experience as surreal. Younger actors often spoke about their admiration for the original stars. Meanwhile, veteran performers enjoyed seeing new talent bring fresh energy into the franchise. This mutual respect contributed to the film's collaborative atmosphere. The movie also places significant emphasis on friendship and teamwork. Unlike many modern blockbusters that focus heavily on individual heroes, Ghostbusters has always been about groups of people solving problems together. The cast had to convincingly portray a team capable of functioning under pressure. Several scenes required actors to react to visual effects that would be added later. This process demands imagination and concentration. During filming, performers might be looking at empty space while pretending to see terrifying supernatural entities. Their reactions help sell the illusion once visual effects are completed. Comedy remained another essential aspect of the performances. Ghostbusters humor often comes from character interactions rather than traditional jokes. Awkward conversations, scientific explanations, misunderstandings, and deadpan reactions all contribute to the franchise's comedic identity. The actors worked closely with the director to maintain this balance. They wanted humor to emerge naturally from situations rather than interrupt dramatic moments. This approach helps preserve the emotional stakes while still delivering laughs. Phoebe's relationships with other characters receive particular attention throughout the film. Her interactions reveal different aspects of her personality. Around family members, she displays vulnerability. Around fellow Ghostbusters, she demonstrates confidence. Around supernatural mysteries, she shows endless curiosity. This layered characterization helps elevate the movie beyond a simple adventure story. Audiences become invested in the characters because they feel like real people facing extraordinary circumstances. The returning cast also carries emotional weight because of the franchise's history. Every appearance by a veteran Ghostbuster reminds audiences of previous adventures, yet the movie avoids relying entirely on nostalgia. Instead, it uses that history as a foundation for new stories. The casting process ultimately succeeded because the filmmakers understood what audiences wanted. Fans did not simply want familiar faces, they wanted meaningful character interactions, emotional growth, and a believable passing of the torch from one generation to the next. By combining experienced performers with talented younger actors. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire creates cast capable of honoring the franchise's legacy while building its future. The result is a team that feels connected by shared purpose, shared history, and a shared determination to protect the world from supernatural threats. As production moved forward, this cast would become the foundation upon which the entire film was built. Their chemistry, performances, and relationships would shape everything from emotional scenes to action sequences, helping transform an ambitious script into a living, breathing adventure. Once the main cast was assembled and the direction of the sequel became clear, the writers faced perhaps the most difficult task of the entire production. They had to create a story that felt worthy of the Ghostbusters name while also expanding the universe in meaningful ways. Audiences expected comedy, ghosts, scientific gadgets, emotional character moments, and large scale supernatural action. Balancing all of those elements inside one screenplay required months of planning, rewriting, and experimentation. The writing process for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire began with a simple question: what kind of threat could challenge both the new and old Ghostbusters at the same time? Previous films had featured giant supernatural beings, ancient gods, and paranormal disasters. The writers knew they needed something different. They wanted a villain that felt ancient, mysterious, and genuinely dangerous. Eventually, they became fascinated by the idea of supernatural cold. Ice is something people instinctively understand. It can be beautiful, but it can also be deadly. A frozen landscape often creates feelings of isolation and fear. The concept offered visual possibilities as well as symbolic meaning. The writers imagined an entity capable of stopping life itself, turning a busy city into a silent, frozen wasteland. This idea gradually evolved into the film's central villain. Rather than simply being another ghost, the antagonist became an ancient force linked to forgotten history and supernatural mythology. The writers wanted audiences to feel that this being had existed long before modern civilization and had remained hidden for centuries, waiting for an opportunity to return. The concept of an ancient evil also fit naturally within the Ghostbusters universe. Throughout the franchise, supernatural threats often originate from legends, myths, or ancient beliefs. By connecting the villain to a mysterious past, the film could explore new areas of paranormal lore while maintaining continuity with earlier movies. Creating the villain required extensive world building. The writers asked themselves numerous questions. Where did this entity come from? Why had it remained dormant? What did it want? How could it be defeated? Answering these questions helped establish internal logic for the story. One of the most interesting creative decisions involved making the villain feel more like a force of nature than a traditional movie monster. Instead of simply attacking people physically, it threatens entire environments. Temperatures drop. Ice spreads across the city. Panic grows among citizens. The danger feels larger than any single battle because it affects everyone. This approach increases the scale of the story significantly. The Ghostbusters are not merely protecting a neighborhood or a building, they are trying to prevent a supernatural catastrophe that could transform the entire world. The writers also wanted the sequel to deepen the mythology surrounding ghosts themselves. Previous films often focused on capturing spirits, but Frozen Empire explores broader questions about paranormal energy and ancient supernatural forces. This expansion helps make the universe feel larger and more mysterious. At the same time, the screenplay needed strong emotional foundations. Spectacle alone would not be enough. Audiences needed characters they cared about. The writers therefore spent considerable time developing relationships between family members, friends, mentors, and teammates. Phoebe's storyline became especially important during development. She is highly intelligent, but intelligence does not solve every problem. The film explores her desire for independence and her frustration with limitations placed upon her. She wants to contribute, to be respected, and to prove herself capable of handling serious responsibility. This emotional conflict mirrors a common experience for many young people. They often feel ready for challenges before adults believe they are prepared. By connecting Phoebe's supernatural adventure to a relatable personal struggle, the writers create emotional investment beyond the action scenes. The family dynamic remains another essential component of the story. Ghostbusters has gradually evolved into a franchise about legacy and family as much as ghost hunting. The Spenglers are not simply paranormal investigators, they are a family trying to support one another while facing extraordinary circumstances. The screenplay includes moments of tension, humor, affection, and disagreement between family members. These interactions help ground the fantastical elements in recognizable human experiences. Even when ghosts are flying through the air and cities are freezing, audiences can connect with the emotional reality of family relationships. The writers also devoted attention to the original Ghostbusters. Bringing back beloved characters creates opportunities, but it also creates challenges. The screenplay needed to honor their history without allowing nostalgia to dominate the narrative. To solve this problem, the veteran Ghostbusters were integrated directly into the story's central conflict. Their experience becomes valuable because they possess knowledge accumulated through decades of paranormal encounters. Rather than standing on the sidelines, they actively participate in solving the mystery. This decision reinforces one of the movie's primary themes. Every generation has something valuable to contribute. The younger characters bring fresh ideas and energy. The older characters bring wisdom and experience. Neither group can succeed alone. The screenplay structure reflects this philosophy. Different characters solve different pieces of the puzzle. Some uncover historical information. Others develop scientific solutions. Others confront emotional challenges. Together, these efforts combine into a unified mission. Humor remained a constant consideration throughout development. Ghostbusters has never been pure horror. Comedy is part of its identity. However, modern audiences often expect faster pacing and larger action sequences than viewers in the 1980s. The writers therefore worked carefully to ensure jokes did not undermine dramatic moments. Many comedic scenes emerge naturally from character interactions. Scientists explain impossible concepts with complete seriousness. Team members argue during dangerous situations. Strange paranormal events are treated as ordinary workplace problems. This style of humor has always been central to the franchise. World building expanded significantly in this installment. The Ghostbusters headquarters receives greater attention, functioning almost like a character itself. The building contains equipment, research materials, memories, and secrets accumulated over decades. Exploring this location helps connect the sequel to the franchise's rich history. The writers also imagined how the Ghostbusters organization might operate in a modern world. Technology has changed dramatically since the original films. Social media exists, smartphones exist, information spreads instantly. Paranormal events would be viewed very differently in such an environment. These modern elements help the movie feel contemporary while preserving the franchise's classic spirit. The Ghostbusters remain scientists and problem solvers, but they now operate within a world transformed by technological advancement. Another important aspect of development involved pacing. The writers wanted the story to begin with energy, gradually build mystery, and eventually explode into large scale supernatural chaos. This escalation creates momentum and keeps audience engaged. Early scenes establish characters and relationships. Middle sections deepen the mystery surrounding the ancient threat. Later portions deliver increasingly intense confrontations as the danger grows. This structure follows classic adventure storytelling principles while allowing room for character development. The film's themes became clearer as revisions continued. Legacy, family, responsibility, courage, and cooperation all play major roles. Beneath the ghosts and visual effects lies a story about people learning from one another and finding strength through teamwork. Even the frozen villain reflects these themes. Ice represents isolation, stillness, and separation. The Ghostbusters counter those forces through friendship, family bonds, and collective effort. This thematic contrast gives the story additional depth beyond its surface level adventure. As the screenplay neared completion, the creative team felt they had something ambitious. The movie would feature returning heroes, new characters, expanded mythology, emotional growth, comedy, mystery, and large scale supernatural action. It aimed to respect the franchise's history while pushing it into new territory. The writing process had transformed a simple idea about supernatural ice into a full scale cinematic adventure. The foundation was now in place. The next challenge would be bringing that vision to life through production design, practical effects, visual effects, costumes, and filming. That stage would require hundreds of artists, technicians, designers, and craftspeople working together to transform words on a page into a frozen supernatural world that audiences could believe in. The journey from script to screen was only beginning, and the scale of the production would soon become far larger than anyone initially imagined. With the screenplay largely completed, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire entered the long and complicated stage of pre production. This is often the phase audiences never see, yet it can determine whether a film succeeds or fails. Before a single frame is filmed, hundreds of decisions must be made regarding locations, costumes, visual effects, props, creature designs, equipment, vehicles, and the overall visual identity of the movie. For Frozen Empire, pre production was especially important because the film's central concept required the creation of a world slowly being consumed by supernatural ice. The filmmakers wanted audiences to believe that New York City was facing a threat unlike anything seen before in the franchise. Achieving that illusion demanded months of planning. One of the first tasks involved defining the visual style of the movie. The creative team studied the appearance of previous Ghostbusters films. The original movies had a slightly gritty urban look that reflected New York during the 1980s. Ghostbusters Afterlife introduced warmer colors and a rural atmosphere. The sequel needed its own identity while still feeling connected to both. The solution was contrast. The filmmakers wanted the city to feel alive, busy, colorful, and energetic at the beginning of the story. As the supernatural threat grows stronger, those familiar environments gradually become colder, darker, and more threatening. This transformation helps audiences feel the danger increasing throughout the narrative. Concept artists spent months creating visual sketches. These early illustrations explored countless possibilities. Some images showed entire streets covered in ice, others depicted frozen skyscrapers glowing beneath supernatural blue light. Still others imagined ghosts trapped inside crystal like structures. These pieces of artwork served as blueprints for every department involved in production. Costume designers, visual effects artists, set builders, and cinematographers all relied upon these concepts to maintain a consistent visual language throughout the film. The Ghostbusters headquarters received significant attention during development. Fans have a strong emotional attachment to the iconic firehouse, so the filmmakers wanted it to feel familiar while also reflecting the passage of time. Every room was carefully examined and redesigned. The production designers added new technology, upgraded workspaces, and expanded areas that audiences had never seen before. The headquarters now feels like a living workplace rather than simply a nostalgic location. Equipment fills shelves. Research materials cover desks. Experimental devices occupy corners of rooms. The goal was to make viewers believe that generations of Ghostbusters had been operating from this building for decades. Props play a major role in any Ghostbusters film. The proton packs, ghost traps, PKE meters, and containment units are among the most recognizable pieces of equipment in movie history. The design team understood how important these items were to fans. Rather than completely redesigning the equipment, the filmmakers chose evolution instead of replacement. The gear retains its familiar appearance while incorporating subtle updates. Scratches, repairs, modifications, and technological improvements suggest years of continued use. This attention to detail helps create authenticity. The equipment feels functional and lived in rather than freshly manufactured. The proton packs required particular care. Actors spent significant time carrying them, so designers had to balance visual accuracy with practical comfort. Modern materials allowed the production team to create lighter versions for filming while preserving the iconic appearance audience expected. The costume department faced similar challenges. Ghostbusters uniforms are instantly recognizable around the world. However, the sequel needed to distinguish different generations of characters while maintaining visual consistency. Designers carefully adjusted uniforms to reflect each character's personality and role within the team. Some uniforms appear worn and experienced, reflecting years of fieldwork. Others look newer, representing younger Ghostbusters still finding their place within the organization. Small details such as patches, equipment placement, and personalization help distinguish individuals without disrupting the franchise's established aesthetic. Creating the ghosts themselves became one of the most exciting parts of pre-production. Every Ghostbusters movie introduces new supernatural entities. Fans eagerly anticipate discovering what strange creatures will appear next. The filmmakers wanted Frozen Empire to feature a diverse collection of spirits ranging from humorous to terrifying. Concept artists generated hundreds of ghost designs. Some creatures were playful and mischievous. Others appeared genuinely disturbing. Many designs combined human features with supernatural distortions, creating beings that felt both familiar and unsettling. The creative team explored numerous inspirations. They studied folklore, mythology, historical artwork, and even unusual natural phenomena. This research helped create ghosts that felt distinct from previous franchise entries. The movie's central villain demanded even greater attention. Designing a major antagonist is always difficult because the character must appear powerful, memorable, and unique. The filmmakers wanted audiences to instantly recognize that this entity represented a threat unlike anything the Ghostbusters had faced before. Early concepts experimented with various forms. Some versions emphasized monstrous features. Others leaned toward an almost godlike appearance. Eventually, the team settled on a design that balanced mystery, power, and ancient supernatural presence. Ice became the defining visual motif, frozen textures, crystalline structures, and supernatural frost influenced every aspect of the villain's appearance. The result feels less like a traditional monster and more like an ancient force awakened from a forgotten age. The visual effects department became heavily involved during this stage. Modern blockbusters often begin planning effects years before filming starts. Artists create digital models, animation tests, and environmental simulations long before cameras roll. For Frozen Empire, one major challenge involved depicting supernatural freezing realistically. Ordinary ice behaves according to physical laws. The filmmakers wanted their supernatural ice to feel believable while also possessing magical qualities. Artists studied footage of freezing water, glaciers, snowstorms, and ice formations. They analyzed how frost spreads across surfaces and how light interacts with frozen environments. This research helped create visual effects grounded in reality. The production design team also built numerous practical elements. Real ice effects, frozen props, and physical set decorations provided actors with tangible environments during filming. Combining practical effects with digital enhancements often produces more convincing results than relying entirely on computers. Another fascinating aspect of pre production involved sound design planning. Although audiences rarely think about sound before a movie releases, the creative team understood that ice has a unique auditory identity. Cracking, shifting, snapping, and echoing noises all contribute to the sensation of extreme cold. Sound designers began collecting recordings and experimenting with combinations of natural and artificial sounds. These early experiments would later help define the villain's presence throughout the film. The vehicles also required attention. The famous Ecto 1 remains one of the franchise's most beloved symbols. Designers wanted the vehicle to continue evolving while maintaining its iconic identity. Additional modifications reflected the practical needs of a modern Ghostbusters operation. The car needed to look capable of handling increasingly dangerous supernatural situations. Every addition had to feel functional within the world of the story rather than existing solely for visual appeal. Lighting design became another crucial consideration. The filmmakers envisioned dramatic contrast between warm city environments and the cold supernatural threat. As ice spreads through the story, lighting gradually shifts toward cooler tones. This visual progression subconsciously reinforces the growing danger. Color palettes were carefully planned for every major sequence. Warm oranges, yellows, and reds often represent human activity and safety. Blues, whites, and icy tones signal the presence of supernatural forces. This color strategy helps audiences understand emotional and narrative shifts without requiring dialogue. By the end of pre production, the scale of the project had become enormous. Thousands of designs, illustrations, technical plans, and creative decisions had transformed the screenplay into a practical roadmap for filming. Entire departments now understood how the world should look, feel, and function. Sets were ready to be built, costumes were prepared, props were completed, vehicles were modified, ghosts had been designed, the frozen villain had taken shape, the foundation for the film's visual identity was finally complete. What remained was perhaps the most demanding phase of all: principal photography. Cast members would soon step onto sets, cameras would begin rolling, and years of planning would be tested under the pressures of real production. The challenge ahead involved capturing performances, action sequences, emotional moments, and supernatural spectacle while coordinating hundreds of crew members and millions of dollars worth of resources. It was during filming that the true scale of Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire would finally become visible. When principal photography finally began on Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire, years of planning were put to the test. Development meetings, script revisions, concept artwork, costume designs, and technical preparations had all led to this moment. Now the cast and crew had to transform ideas into reality. For a production of this scale, filming was a massive operation involving hundreds of people working across multiple departments every day. The return to New York City played a major role in shaping the production. From the earliest stages of planning, the filmmakers understood that the city itself needed to feel like an important character. The original Ghostbusters films became closely associated with New York, and many fans considered the city an essential part of the franchise's identity. Filming in New York offered authenticity that could not easily be recreated elsewhere. The architecture, streets, traffic, atmosphere, and energy all contribute to the unique feeling of the city. Whenever audiences see Ghostbusters equipment moving through crowded urban environments, there is an immediate connection to the classic films. However, filming in New York also creates enormous logistical challenges. Busy streets cannot simply be closed without careful coordination. Traffic must be redirected, pedestrian access must be managed. Equipment trucks require parking space. Camera crews need room to work. Every location involves permits, schedules, and negotiations. The production team spent months coordinating with local authorities and businesses. Some scenes required extensive planning because they involved large numbers of extras, vehicles, visual effects elements, and complicated camera setups. The famous Ghostbusters firehouse once again became a major visual landmark within the movie. Even though some interior scenes were filmed on constructed sets, exterior sequences benefited from the real world locations' recognizable appearance. Fans visiting filming locations often gathered nearby hoping to catch glimpses of production activity. The return to the firehouse carried emotional significance for both audiences and crew members. Many people involved with the project grew up watching Ghostbusters films themselves. Standing in locations associated with cinematic history created a sense of connection between past and present generations of filmmakers. The director approached the movie with a clear understanding of the franchise's legacy. Rather than simply copying the style of earlier entries, the goal was to blend classic Ghostbusters storytelling with modern filmmaking techniques. The result aimed to feel familiar while taking advantage of contemporary technology and cinematic tools. One of the most important directing challenges involved balancing tone. Ghostbusters has always occupied a unique space between comedy, horror, adventure, and science fiction. Lean too heavily into horror, and the film risks losing its playful identity. Focus too much on comedy, and supernatural threat may no longer feel dangerous. The director constantly worked to maintain equilibrium between these elements. Scenes involving family relationships required emotional sincerity. Action sequences needed excitement and urgency. Comedic moments had to feel natural rather than forced. This balancing act influenced everything from camera placement to actor performances. The younger cast members often spoke about the collaborative atmosphere on set. Many scenes involved experienced performers working alongside newer actors. The production encouraged communication and experimentation, allowing cast members to contribute ideas while maintaining consistency with the overall vision. Filming action sequences presented another significant challenge. Ghostbusters movies feature unique forms of action compared to traditional blockbusters. Instead of relying exclusively on physical combat, the franchise centers around ghost hunting technology. Proton streams, traps, containment devices, and paranormal equipment all play essential roles during confrontations. Capturing these sequences requires careful planning because many visual effects are added later during post production. Actors often perform while looking at markers, lights, or temporary stand ins representing creatures that do not yet exist. This process demands imagination and concentration. Performers must react convincingly to invisible threats while maintaining emotional authenticity. The crew used a variety of practical techniques to help actors visualize supernatural events. Temporary lighting effects, sound cues, and physical props provided reference points during filming. These tools make performances feel more natural and believable. One particularly demanding aspect of production involved depicting the spreading supernatural ice. Because the frozen effects would ultimately combine practical and digital elements, multiple departments needed to coordinate closely. Set designers created physical frozen surfaces. Makeup artists applied frost effects to actors and props. Visual effects teams planned digital enhancements that would later expand these practical foundations. Many scenes required environments to appear partially frozen during filming. Crew members spent hours applying ice-like materials, artificial frost, and environmental details to create the desired appearance. Maintaining continuity became increasingly difficult as the story progressed. The freezing threat grows stronger throughout the film, meaning locations often appear in multiple stages of transformation. A street might appear normal in one scene, partially frozen in another, and completely covered in ice later in the story. Production teams meticulously documented every detail to ensure consistency across shooting schedules. Weather conditions created additional complications. Ironically, filming a movie about supernatural cold often took place under warm real world conditions. Actors wearing heavy costumes sometimes worked under bright sunlight while pretending to experience freezing temperatures. Performers had to rely on acting techniques rather than physical discomfort to sell the illusion. Facial expressions, body language, and vocal performances all contributed to creating believable reactions. The visual effects department maintained a strong presence during production. Modern blockbusters frequently integrate effects planning directly into the filming process. Specialists monitored camera angles, lighting conditions, and technical requirements to ensure future digital work would blend seamlessly with live action footage. Some of the film's most ambitious scenes involved large scale supernatural events affecting entire city environments. To achieve these moments, production teams combined practical effects, detailed sets, motion control cameras, and extensive visual effects planning. Each department needed to understand how its work would interact with the contributions of others. The Ecto 1 once again became a major attraction during filming. Whenever the iconic vehicle appeared on location, attention followed. Crew members recognized its cultural significance. Fans gathering near filming sites often reacted enthusiastically whenever the famous car drove through the streets. Action sequences involving the Ecto 1 required precise coordination. Camera vehicles, stunt drivers, safety personnel, and visual effects supervisors all worked together to capture dynamic footage while maintaining safe working conditions. The practical effects team also contributed heavily to production. Although modern technology allows filmmakers to create almost anything digitally, practical effects remain valuable because they provide tangible elements for actors and cameras. Smoke effects, mechanical props, environmental details, and physical creature components all helped create realism. Many ghostly encounters combined practical and digital techniques. This hybrid approach preserves a sense of texture and physical presence that can sometimes be difficult to achieve through computer generated imagery alone. The production scale became particularly evident during scenes involving large groups of performers. Crowd sequences required extensive coordination between assistant directors, extras, stunt performers, and camera crews. When supernatural disasters strike within the story, the audience must believe entire populations are reacting to unfolding events. These scenes often involved hundreds of people working together simultaneously. Timing, movement, and positioning had to be carefully choreographed to maintain visual clarity. The younger cast members faced increasing responsibility as filming progressed. Because the sequel places greater emphasis on their characters, they carried substantial portions of the narrative. Balancing emotional scenes with action heavy sequences required significant versatility. Veteran cast members provided valuable guidance throughout production. Their experience with previous Ghostbusters films helped create continuity across generations. Many behind the scenes accounts describe a supportive environment where knowledge and enthusiasm were shared freely. As filming continued, the production gradually accumulated thousands of individual shots. Each scene represented countless hours of preparation and execution. What appears on screen for only a few seconds may have required days of work from multiple departments. The director constantly monitored pacing and performance quality. Every sequence needed to contribute to the overall story while maintaining the film's unique tone. Adjustments were made daily as new challenges emerged. By the time principal photography approached completion, the crew had captured an enormous amount of material. Action sequences, emotional conversations, comedic moments, supernatural encounters, and large scale set pieces were all safely recorded. Yet, despite months of filming, the movie was still far from finished. The footage now needed to enter post production, where editors, composers, visual effects artists, sound designers, and numerous specialists would spend many additional months shaping the raw material into a completed film. For Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, this stage would prove especially important because many of the movie's most spectacular elements, including ghosts, supernatural ice effects, and the ancient frozen villain, still existed only as concepts waiting to be fully realized. The next chapter of the film's journey would transform unfinished footage into the final adventure audiences would eventually experience on the big screen. Once filming wrapped on Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the project entered one of its most technically demanding phases, post production. At this stage, the movie still didn't truly exist in the way audiences would eventually see it. Instead, it was a massive collection of raw footage, partial effects shots, unfinished sound, temporary edits, and placeholder visuals waiting to be transformed into a finished cinematic experience. The editing process began immediately. Editors went through thousands of hours of footage, selecting the best takes, refining pacing, and shaping the emotional rhythm of the story. Ghostbusters films rely heavily on timing, especially because comedy, tension, and action often overlap in the same scene. A moment that is too slow loses energy, while a moment that is too fast can confuse the audience. Finding the right balance required constant adjustment. Early rough cuts of the film were significantly longer than the final version. Scenes were trimmed, rearranged, or combined to maintain narrative flow. Some moments focused heavily on character interaction, while others emphasized supernatural action. The challenge was ensuring neither element overshadowed the other. As editing progressed, the visual effects department began fully taking over the film's transformation. Frozen Empire is a VFX heavy production, and much of what appears on screen does not exist during filming. Ghosts, proton streams, supernatural ice spreading through buildings, and the central frozen entity all needed to be created digitally. This required collaboration between multiple visual effects studios working simultaneously. Each ghost had to be designed not just as a visual idea but as a fully animated performance. Unlike simple background creatures, Ghostbusters ghosts often interact with the environment and react to the proton beams. That means animators had to consider weight, movement style, personality, and timing. Some ghosts behave playfully, floating through objects or teasing characters. Others are aggressive, fast moving, and unpredictable. Animators gave each entity its own behavior language so audiences could instantly recognize differences between spirits. The proton streams, one of the most iconic elements of the franchise, also received detailed attention. These streams are not static effects. They must interact with environments, bend realistically, connect with targets, and respond dynamically when multiple Ghostbusters fire simultaneously. Each beam required careful simulation to ensure it felt physical and powerful. The most complex visual challenge, however, was the supernatural freezing effect. Unlike normal ice, the film's Frozen Empire phenomenon is meant to feel alive. It spreads unnaturally fast, grows in impossible patterns, and reacts to supernatural energy. Artists designed layered simulations where frost forms, thickens, fractures, and expands across surfaces in controlled chaos. Buildings were digitally transformed frame by frame, streets, cars, and even crowds were gradually overtaken by ice. This transformation needed to feel believable while still maintaining a supernatural quality that separates it from real world weather effects. To achieve this, visual effects teams combined practical footage of real ice with digital enhancements. Practical frost was often filmed on set or applied physically to props, giving actors something tangible to interact with. Later, digital extensions expanded those effects far beyond what was physically possible. Sound design played an equally important role in bringing the frozen world to life. Every Ghostbusters film has a distinct audio identity, and Frozen Empire builds upon that tradition while introducing new sonic elements. The sound team created a layered approach where every supernatural event carries its own unique audio signature. Ice cracking sounds were carefully crafted using a combination of real recordings and manipulated audio. The result is not just simple breaking ice, but deep, resonant fractures that feel massive and unsettling. When the frozen entity spreads its influence, the soundscape shifts gradually, creating an atmosphere of creeping cold. Ghost sounds also received significant attention. Some spirits produce eerie whispers, while others emit distorted vocalizations or unnatural echoes. The goal was to make each ghost feel distinct even before it appears visually. The proton pack sound effects were refined as well. The familiar hum and firing noise remained recognizable, but subtle adjustments were made to give the weapons more power and clarity in modern surround sound environments. Music composition became another major pillar of post production. The score for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire builds on the franchise's iconic musical identity while expanding it into a more emotional and cinematic direction. The composer worked closely with the director to balance nostalgia with new themes. Familiar musical motifs appear throughout the film, reminding audiences of the original Ghostbusters legacy. However, new orchestral themes were created for the Spengler family and the rising supernatural threat. These themes evolve as the story progresses, reflecting character growth and increasing danger. For example, lighter, curious melodies accompany Phoebe's early investigations, while darker, heavier tones emerge as the frozen empire expands. The music gradually shifts from warmth to coldness, mirroring the visual transformation of the city. During action sequences, the score becomes fast paced and energetic, incorporating rhythmic percussion and brass elements that match the intensity of proton battles and ghost encounters. In quieter emotional moments, the music pulls back, allowing character relationships to take center stage. One of the most important goals of the soundtrack was to unify the old and new generations of Ghostbusters. Musical motifs associated with the original team are subtly blended with newer themes, reinforcing the idea that both eras are connected. Color grading and final visual polish also took place during post production. This step ensures that every shot matches the intended mood. The city's early warmth is carefully balanced with the creeping blue and white tones of the supernatural ice. As the story progresses, the color palette shifts noticeably colder. Editors and visual effects supervisors worked closely to ensure consistency across every scene. Even small details, such as reflections, lighting changes, and environmental continuity, had to be checked repeatedly. Test screenings were conducted during this stage. Early audiences viewed rough versions of the film and provided feedback. These reactions helped the filmmakers identify pacing issues, emotional beats that needed strengthening, and action scenes that required refinement. Some sequences were re edited based on this feedback. This is a normal part of large scale filmmaking, especially for franchise films that must satisfy both general audiences and long-time fans. As post production neared completion, the film finally began to resemble its finished form. Ghosts moved smoothly across the screen. Proton beams connected cleanly with targets. Frozen environments looked consistent and immersive. The score elevated emotional and action moments. Sound design added depth and realism. What began as a script had now become a fully realized cinematic experience. But even at this stage, one final phase remained before the film could meet audiences worldwide: marketing and release. Trailers, posters, promotional campaigns, and global distribution plans would soon introduce Ghostbusters. Frozen Empire to the world, the journey from concept to screen was nearly complete, but its reception in the real world was still ahead. Along with the reactions, debates, box office performance, and cultural impact that would follow. As Ghostbusters Frozen Empire moved out of post production, the focus shifted toward the outside world: how audiences would first hear about it, how anticipation would be built, and how the film would perform once it finally reached cinemas. For a franchise as iconic as Ghostbusters, marketing is not just promotion, it is part of the cultural event itself. The first teaser materials were designed to do one thing: remind audiences that Ghostbusters were back, but this time on a much larger and colder scale. Early promotional images leaned heavily into the frozen aesthetic: snow covered city streets, ghostly blue lighting, and hints of supernatural ice immediately signaled that this sequel would not repeat the exact tone of Afterlife. It was bigger, darker, and more apocalyptic in its stakes. The trailers gradually revealed more information, but carefully avoided giving away the full scope of the story. This balance is always tricky for blockbuster marketing. Show too little and audiences lose interest. Show too much and the mystery disappears. The promotional campaign leaned into atmosphere rather than plot details, emphasizing visuals, emotion, and legacy characters working together. One of the strongest marketing points was the return to New York City. The city has always been closely associated with Ghostbusters, and the trailers made sure to highlight familiar locations: busy streets, towering buildings, the firehouse headquarters, and the Ecto 1 driving through urban chaos. These images instantly connected longtime fans to the original films. The marketing also placed heavy emphasis on generational storytelling. Posters and promotional materials often featured both the original Ghostbusters and the Spengler family together, reinforcing the idea that this was not just a sequel but a continuation of a legacy shared across decades. Fans online reacted quickly. Social media platforms became filled with trailer breakdowns, speculation videos, and meme content. Every small detail was analyzed. Background ghosts, hidden references, and returning props were all dissected frame by frame. The Ghostbusters fandom, already active for years, became even more energized during the marketing phase. As release approached, expectations began to rise significantly. The success of Ghostbusters Afterlife had already proven that audiences were willing to return to the franchise if the emotional core remained strong. However, expectations for Frozen Empire were higher because of its larger scale and more ambitious concept. When the film finally released in theaters in 2024, it entered a highly competitive box office environment filled with other major releases. Despite this, Frozen Empire opened with strong global attention. Fans of the franchise, families, and nostalgia driven audiences all contributed to its initial turnout. The opening weekend performance showed solid interest, particularly in markets where Ghostbusters has historically been popular. The combination of legacy characters and new storylines attracted both older fans and younger viewers discovering the franchise for the first time. However, audience reactions were mixed in tone, even if generally positive overall. Many viewers appreciated the visual effects, the return to New York, and the expanded supernatural mythology. The Frozen concept was widely praised for its originality and scale, with many highlighting the citywide transformation as one of the film's most impressive achievements. At the same time, some viewers felt the film struggled slightly with balancing its large cast. With so many returning characters and new additions, certain emotional arcs felt compressed or underdeveloped for some audiences. This is a common challenge in ensemble franchise films where multiple generations must share screen time. Critics also noted that the film leaned heavily into nostalgia, though opinions varied on whether this was a strength or a weakness. Some saw it as a respectful continuation of legacy storytelling. Others felt it occasionally overshadowed the development of newer characters. Despite mixed critical responses, audience engagement remained strong. The Ghostbusters brand continues to hold a unique cultural position, and Frozen Empire benefited from decades of fan investment. Many viewers specifically praised the chemistry between cast members and the emotional moments between family characters. Internationally, the film performed steadily, though not at the explosive level of some other modern blockbusters. Its strongest performance remained in regions with established fan bases for the franchise. Merchandise sales, online engagement, and streaming anticipation also contributed to its overall cultural footprint. Box office discussions often centered around whether the film met expectations rather than purely its earnings. For legacy franchises, success is measured not only in numbers but also in audience satisfaction and long term franchise viability. One of the most notable outcomes of the release was the continued relevance of Ghostbusters in modern pop culture. Even decades after its debut, the franchise still generates memes, discussions, fan theories, and online debates. Frozen Empire contributed heavily to this ongoing cultural presence. Memes played a surprisingly large role in the film's online life. Scenes involving frozen environments, ghost encounters, and character reactions quickly became internet material. The contrast between serious supernatural danger and comedic character expressions made the film highly shareable on social media. Some memes focused on Phoebe's character, highlighting her intelligence and deadpan reactions. Others centered around the visual spectacle of the frozen city or the exaggerated supernatural effects. The Ghostbusters logo itself remains one of the most recognizable symbols in entertainment, and it frequently appeared in fan edits and parody content. Audience nostalgia also fueled online engagement. Fans revisited older films, compared character arcs across generations, and debated how Frozen Empire fit into the overall timeline. This type of discussion helps keep the franchise active even beyond theatrical release. From a broader industry perspective, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire demonstrated the continued viability of legacy sequels. While not every franchise can successfully bridge generations, Ghostbusters remains one of the few that consistently attempts to evolve while honoring its past. The film's reception highlighted an ongoing challenge in modern blockbuster filmmaking: how to balance nostalgia with originality. Too much reliance on the past risks stagnation. Too much innovation risks alienating core fans. Frozen Empire sits directly in the middle of that debate. As its theatrical run continued, attention gradually shifted toward long term performance and franchise future planning. Discussions began about where the series could go next, how the Spengler family might evolve, and whether further supernatural threats would expand the mythology even more. By the end of its global release window, Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire had firmly established itself as a significant entry in the franchise. Not necessarily the most critically acclaimed, but one that pushed the universe forward in scale, ambition, and visual creativity. The story of the film, however, does not end at the box office. Its true impact lies in its place within the Ghostbusters legacy, how it reshapes the mythology, and how it sets the stage for future stories in a world where ghosts, science, family, and comedy continue to collide. When Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is looked at beyond its surface as a supernatural action comedy, it starts to reveal a deeper layer of storytelling that connects closely with the franchise's long running themes. At its core, the film is not just about stopping a frozen apocalypse, it is about identity, inheritance, fear of the future, and the pressure of carrying something that already has a history before you even touch it. One of the strongest themes running through the movie is legacy. The Ghostbusters universe has always been built on this idea, but Frozen Empire makes it more direct than ever. The original team represents the past, scientists who accidentally became heroes and defined an entire cultural moment. The Spengler family represents the present and future, people born into a world where Ghostbusters is already a known concept, not an experiment. The film constantly asks a quiet question: what happens when a legacy becomes heavier than the people carrying it? Phoebe's character is central to this idea. She is brilliant, observant, and capable of understanding things far beyond her age, yet she is still treated like someone who needs guidance. Her arc is not just about fighting ghosts, it is about being taken seriously. The supernatural chaos outside mirrors her internal conflict. Just as the frozen empire spreads uncontrollably, her frustration grows when she feels limited or underestimated. Her journey becomes about finding balance between curiosity and responsibility. Trevor's arc works in a quieter but important way. He represents adaptation rather than intellect. While Phoebe leans towards science and logic, Trevor grows through experience and action. His development reflects a different kind of maturity, not the ability to understand everything, but the ability to stay steady when things become unpredictable. Together, they represent two halves of the Ghostbusters philosophy. Thinking and doing, the returning original Ghostbusters bring another layer of symbolism. They are not portrayed as outdated or replaced. Instead, they function like living history. Their presence is a reminder that heroism is not a fixed moment in time. It is something that continues evolving. However, the film also subtly acknowledges that time has passed. They are no longer the center of the story, and that shift is intentional. It reflects how real world audiences have grown older alongside the franchise. The frozen antagonist itself is more than just a visual threat. Symbolically, ice represents stagnation, emotional distance, and the stopping of progress. Throughout the film, the spreading cold is not only physical, it also reflects fear. Fear of change, fear of failure, fear of stepping into roles that feel too large. In that sense, the villain is almost thematic rather than personal. It is not simply trying to destroy New York, it is trying to freeze growth itself. New York City, as always, plays an emotional role in the story. In Ghostbusters films, the city is never just a backdrop. It is a living environment that reacts, suffers, and survives alongside the characters. In Frozen Empire, the city's transformation into ice is especially powerful because it visually removes warmth, noise, and movement, three things that define urban life. The freezing of the city becomes a metaphor for isolation on a massive scale. Another important theme is teamwork across generations. Many modern films focus on passing the torch, but Frozen Empire leans more towards shared responsibility rather than replacement. The older Ghostbusters are not discarded, and the younger ones are not fully independent. Instead, both groups are shown as incomplete without each other. Experience without innovation becomes rigid. Innovation without experience becomes unstable. The film suggests that survival depends on collaboration between different perspectives. Symbolically, the Ghostbusters equipment also reflects this idea. The proton packs, traps, and gadgets are constantly evolving but never completely replaced. They represent tradition adapting to new needs. The equipment is both old and new at the same time, much like the team using it. This subtle detail reinforces the franchise's belief in continuity rather than reinvention. From a cinematic perspective, Frozen Empire also continues the franchise's long standing blend of genres. It is not just comedy or horror or science fiction, it is all of them at once. This hybrid identity is one of the reasons Ghostbusters has survived for decades. The film uses humor to reduce tension, fear to raise stakes, and emotion to ground everything. That constant shifting of tone mirrors real life more than traditional genre films, which is why audiences often find it familiar even in its most fantastical moments. The visual storytelling also carries meaning. The gradual shift from warm colors to cold blues and whites is not just aesthetic, it reflects emotional progression. Early scenes feel alive, energetic, and familiar. As the story progresses, the world becomes visually emptier and more controlled by the supernatural force. By the final act, the dominance of ice visually communicates loss of normality and stability. In terms of franchise legacy, Frozen Empire sits at an interesting point. It is not a reset, nor is it a conclusion. It functions more like a transition. It expands the mythology without breaking it, and it reinforces the idea that Ghostbusters is no longer just a group of individuals. It is an institution that spans generations. This shift is important because it allows future stories to explore different angles without discarding what came before. However, this approach also creates creative tension. The more characters and history the franchise accumulates, the harder it becomes to balance focus. Some viewers interpret this as richness, while others see it as overcrowding. That divide is part of the modern Ghostbusters identity, a franchise deeply tied to nostalgia, yet constantly trying to move forward from a broader cinematic interpretation. The film reflects a common trend in modern blockbuster storytelling, the merging of legacy IPs with new generation characters. Studios are increasingly relying on familiar worlds while introducing younger leads to secure long term continuity. Frozen Empire is a clear example of this strategy, but it also tries to give it emotional meaning rather than treating it as a purely commercial move. At its emotional core, the film suggests something simple but powerful. History matters, but it should not trap the future. The Frozen Empire itself is almost a warning against being stuck in the past. If nothing changes, everything becomes static, cold, and lifeless. The only way forward is through movement, cooperation, and adaptation. By the end of its narrative journey, Ghostbusters, Frozen Empire is less about ghosts and more about growth. It uses supernatural spectacle to explore very human ideas, how people inherit responsibility, how they deal with expectations, and how they find their place in systems that already existed before them. It may not resolve every tension perfectly, and it may not satisfy every expectation equally, but it succeeds in continuing one of cinema's most unusual franchises in a way that still feels connected to its original spirit. A mix of science, humor, fear, and heart all tied together in one strange, chaotic, and endlessly entertaining universe. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire arrived in theaters in 2024 as the latest chapter in a franchise that has spanned 4 decades, carrying with it the weight of nostalgia, the responsibility of honoring its predecessors, and the challenge of charting a path forward for characters both old and new. Directed by Gil Keenan and written by Keenan alongside Jason Reitman, the film positioned itself as a direct sequel to Ghostbusters Afterlife, which had reintroduced audiences to the Spengler family and reconnected the modern era of the series with its original cast. Frozen Empire represents the fourth mainline entry in the Ghostbusters series and the fifth film overall when accounting for the 2016 all-female reboot, situating it as a bridge between generations of fans and characters alike. At its core, the film continues the story of the Spengler family who relocated from a small town to New York City following the events depicted in Afterlife. 3 years after the Somerville incident, Callie Spengler and her boyfriend Gary Gruberson along with her children Trevor and Phoebe settle into life in the city alongside their friends Lucky Domingo and the young man known as Podcast. Their purpose in moving is to assist Winston Zeddemore and Ray Stantz, two of the original Ghostbusters, in rebuilding and re-establishing the Ghostbusters as a functioning operation within city that started it all. This shift in setting matters significantly to the franchise's identity, returning the action to the iconic firehouse headquarters that has been a visual touchstone of Ghostbusters since 1984. The film's narrative tension begins almost immediately with bureaucratic and political pressure. Following the team's most recent ghost capture, Walter Peck, a character whose antagonism toward the Ghostbusters dates back to the very first film and who has now risen to the position of mayor, threatens to shut the team down permanently. Peck's continued presence as an adversary serves as a through line connecting the new film to its origins, a deliberate callback that rewards longtime fans while also providing a tangible obstacle for the present day characters. In an effort to placate Peck and avoid further scrutiny, Callie makes the difficult decision to remove her daughter Phoebe from active duty with the Ghostbusters on the grounds that she is underage. This decision becomes a significant emotional and narrative pivot point for the film. Phoebe, upset and feeling sidelined despite her evident talent and contributions to the team, retreats to a nearby park where she occupies herself with a game of chess. It is here that she meets Melody, who Phoebe gradually realizes is the ghost of a teenager who died in a fire. The two strike up an unlikely friendship, with Phoebe finding in Melody a kindred spirit who understands her sense of isolation. This relationship becomes one of the emotional anchors of the film, exploring themes of loneliness, connection across different states of existence, and the bonds that can form between the living and the dead within the Ghostbusters universe's established lore. Meanwhile, the film introduces another plot thread involving Ray Stantz and Podcast, who travel around collecting cursed and paranormally significant objects for study and examination, continuing the scientific curiosity that has always defined the character of Ray since the original films. During one of these expeditions, they encounter Nadim Razmadi, a new character played by Kumail Nanjiani, who sells them a peculiar brass orb covered in ritual markings. These markings are identified as being written in Mesopotamian Arabic, immediately signaling that the object carries significance far older and more dangerous than anything the team has previously encountered. Ray, drawing on his decades of experience and expertise, determines that the orb functions as an apotropaic trap, a protective device meant to ward off or contain evil. He notes that copper alloys, of which brass is one, have historically been used in such rituals dating back to the Bronze Age due to a belief in their spiritual conductivity, a detail that roots the film's mythology in real historical and anthropological concepts, even as it builds toward a supernatural threat of franchise-altering proportions. The danger of the orb becomes apparent almost immediately. When Ray attempts to evaluate its psychokinetic energy levels using the team's equipment, the orb releases a burst of broad-spectrum psionic energy. This release manifests physically as a cold wave that travels from the orb all the way to the Ghostbusters firehouse headquarters, where it damages the ecto-containment unit. This is a particularly dangerous development because the containment unit, which holds captured ghosts from the team's operations over the years, is already at near capacity. The stakes are thus established early. Whatever is contained within this ancient orb has the potential to interact catastrophically with the decades of trapped spirits the Ghostbusters have accumulated, threatening to unleash chaos on a scale the team has never faced. Winston Zeddemore, who in the years since the original films has become a successful businessman funding paranormal research, takes the orb to his company's research and development center for further study. This facility is run by Dr. Lars Pinfield, played by James Acaster, a character described as an inventor in the mold of Egon Spengler, bringing a new scientific perspective to the team's efforts. Using an experimental extraction device designed specifically for this kind of work, Pinfield attempts to draw out whatever spiritual energy or orenda might be contained within the orb, but the device proves unable to extract anything. This failure, however, is not without consequence. The orb's captive entity manages to psychically sabotage one of the research center's ecto-confinement units, allowing a ghost referred to as the possessor to escape. This escape spirit then hides within podcast recording equipment, setting up a recurring thread involving an unseen, possessing presence that moves through technology and bodies throughout the film. In an effort to gather more information about the orb and its origins, Lars Pinfield travels with Trevor and Lucky to see Nadim again since he was the one who sold them the artifact in the first place. During this visit, Nadim reveals a crucial detail. His grandmother had kept the orb hidden away within a chamber lined with brass, suggesting that she understood on some level the danger the object represented and had taken deliberate steps to contain it further. This revelation begins to tie Nadim's family history directly into the central mystery of the film. Around this same time, Peter Venkman, played by Bill Murray in another of his recurring appearances as one of the original Ghostbusters, is brought in to help with the investigation. During his involvement, it is discovered that Nadim possesses latent pyrokinesis, the ability to generate or control fire through psychic means. This discovery, seemingly minor at first, becomes enormously important as the film's plot develops, positioning Nadim as someone with a special inherited connection to the forces at play. The film's mythology deepens considerably when Ray, accompanied by Phoebe and Podcast, visits Dr. Hubert Watsky, a research librarian and anthropologist at the New York Public Library, played by Patton Oswalt. Watsky serves as the film's primary exposition source for the ancient history underpinning the plot. He explains that the orb was created more than 4,000 years ago in Southwest Asia by a group of sorcerers known as the Fire Masters. Their purpose in creating the orb was to imprison a demigod named Garaka, an entity who sought to conquer humanity through the power of what is called Kusharet Umoti, translated as the Death Chill, a force capable of killing living creatures through fear alone. This concept of a death by pure terror, a chill that strikes at the heart and ends life without any physical contact, becomes the central supernatural threat that the modern day Ghostbusters must confront. Watsky further explains that Nadim's grandmother was a descendant of this lineage of fire masters, the same group responsible for originally containing Garaka. In 1904, members of an organization called the Manhattan Adventurers Society conducted what they believed was a mock ritual involving the orb, not realizing the true danger of what they were tampering with. Garaka, sensing an opportunity, attempted to use this ritual to escape his prison and in the process murdered the members of the society who had gathered for the occasion. This historical incident, set more than a century before the events of the film, establishes that Garaka's influence and danger have been a lingering dormant threat within New York City for generations, waiting for the right circumstances to reawaken. The reasons behind Garaka's original imprisonment are also explained in detail. He was vulnerable specifically to brass, which connects back to the earlier revelations about the orb's construction and Nadim's grandmother's protective brass-lined chamber. In addition to his vulnerability to brass, fire also played a role in his containment, tying directly into Nadim's own latent pyrokinetic abilities and foreshadowing the role he will eventually play in the climax. Finally, it is revealed that the Firemasters removed Garaka's horns as part of the ritual that trapped him within the orb, a detail that becomes critically important later in the story when Garaka seeks to recover these horns to restore his full power. As the investigation into Garaka's history continues, the escaped possessor ghost that had been hiding within podcast equipment makes a move of its own. The trio, consisting of Ray, Phoebe, and Podcast among others, attempts to stop this ghost from stealing a phonographic recording related to the 1904 ritual conducted by the Manhattan Adventurers Society. This recording presumably contains information or incantations crucial to either containing or freeing Garaka, making it a valuable object that both the Ghostbusters and the forces aligned with Garaka are racing to control. During this confrontation, Walter Peck seizes upon Phoebe's involvement in the incident, despite her having been officially removed from the team, as further ammunition to condemn the Ghostbuster and push forward with his efforts to shut them down. This puts Phoebe in an extremely difficult position, caught between her desire to help and the consequences her involvement brings upon the people she cares about. The fallout from this incident leads to a significant emotional confrontation. After an argument with both Gary and her mother Callie, who are understandably frustrated and worried about the trouble Phoebe's continued involvement keeps causing, Phoebe makes the decision to run away. She takes Melody, her ghostly friend from the park, with her to Winston's research center. Once there, Phoebe makes use of the extraction equipment that had previously been used in the failed attempt to draw energy from the orb. However, rather than using it on an object, Phoebe uses the device on herself, projecting her own consciousness out of her body as a ghost for a period of 2 minutes. This act of astral projection allows Phoebe and Melody for the first time to physically interact with one another as equals, both existing in spirit form simultaneously. This moment represents the emotional high point of their friendship, a brief window where the barriers between the living and the dead are temporarily erased for these two characters. However, this moment of connection is immediately weaponized against Phoebe and, by extension, against the entire city. It is revealed that Melody has been secretly working with Garaka all along. Garaka had offered Melody passage to the afterlife, a reward she desperately wants in exchange for her cooperation in his plans. With Phoebe's spirit now disembodied and vulnerable due to the astral projection, Garaka seizes the opportunity to take control. He uses his influence over Phoebe's separated spirit to force her physical body, which remains behind while her consciousness is projected, to recite the ritual chant from the 1904 recording. This chant is precisely what is needed to free Garaka from the orb. The betrayal by Melody, someone Phoebe had trusted and bonded with, adds a layer of emotional devastation to what is already a moment of significant plot escalation, as the audience and Phoebe alike must grapple with the revelation that this friendship was, at least in part, manipulated from the start. With the ritual completed, Garaka successfully escapes his ancient prison. His first priority is to recover the horns that were removed from him during his original containment, and he travels to Nadim's residence to retrieve them, since they have presumably been kept within the family for generations as part of the items connected to the Firemaster lineage. Once Garaka begins to reclaim his power, he starts terrorizing the city, unleashing the kind of large-scale supernatural chaos that the Ghostbusters franchise has built its visual identity around, with icy effects and overwhelming psychic terror representing his unique brand of menace. The Ghostbusters quickly realize the true scope of the threat they are facing. Garaka's plan, they come to understand, involves liberating not just himself but all of the ghosts contained within the research center, and subsequently the vast number of spirits held within the firehouse's ecto-containment unit, which, as established earlier in the film, is already dangerously close to capacity and has already been damaged by the initial energy release from the orb. Recognizing that their headquarters and everything it contains is now a primary target, the Ghostbusters gather their forces to defend the firehouse against Garaka's assault. This defense effort brings together the full ensemble cast, both the new generation represented by the Spengler family and their friends, and the veteran Ghostbusters including Ray, Winston, and eventually Peter Venkman. Crucially, the team is joined in this defense by Nadim, who finally embraces his heritage and dons the Firemaster brass armor that has been kept by his family, presumably the same armor associated with his grandmother and the lineage of sorcerers who originally contained Garaka millennia ago. Wearing this armor, Nadim attempts to master his latent pyrokinetic powers in real time under the most extreme pressure possible, as the city and the people he has come to know face annihilation. This represents Nadim's full arc within the film, transforming from a somewhat reluctant participant who initially sold the orb without understanding its significance into an active hero who must claim his birthright and fight alongside the Ghostbusters. Despite the combined efforts of this assembled team, Garaka proves to be an overwhelming force. He overpowers the defenders and succeeds in breaching the ecto-containment unit, an event that represents one of the most dangerous developments possible for the Ghostbusters, given the implications of decades worth of captured ghosts potentially being released simultaneously into the city. In response to this dire situation, Phoebe takes decisive action using her scientific knowledge and ingenuity, traits she clearly inherited from her father Egon Spengler, to electroplate Egon's proton pack with brass. Given everything established earlier about Garaka's vulnerability to brass, this modification transforms a standard piece of Ghostbusters equipment into a weapon specifically capable of harming the ancient demigod. At the same time, Melody, who betrayed Phoebe early in service of Garaka's plan, experiences a change of heart. Whether out of guilt, genuine affection for Phoebe, or a realization of the true horror of what she helped unleash, Melody chooses to atone for her misdeeds. She assists Nadim in finally utilizing his pyrokinetic powers effectively, helping him channel the fire-based abilities that, combined with his brass armor, represent the two elements known to weaken Garaka. This collaboration between a redeemed ghost and a newly empowered descendant of the Fire Masters represents the convergence of multiple plot threads that have been building throughout the film. With Garaka weakened through the combined efforts of Phoebe's brass-plated proton pack and Nadam's fire powers, Ray steps into a pivotal role in the climax, drawing on assistance from his fellow veteran Ghostbusters, including Janine Melnitz, the longtime secretary and eventual fellow Ghostbuster played by Annie Potts. Ray manages to capture Garaka. This capture is achieved through an inventive solution, turning the now ruptured containment unit itself into what is described as a greater ghost trap, essentially repurposing the very system that Garaka had breached into the instrument of his own recapture. This represents a satisfying narrative turn, as the team's vulnerability becomes the source of their victory through quick thinking and teamwork. In the aftermath of Garaka's capture, a passage to the afterlife is opened specifically for Melody. Before she departs, she has a chance to reconcile with Phoebe, addressing the betrayal that had defined much of their relationship's later stages, and restoring, at least to some degree, the genuine connection the two had formed earlier in the film. Melody then departs through this passage, finally reuniting with her family in the afterlife, a resolution that provides emotional closure to her character arc and to the friendship between her and Phoebe even as it ends in separation. With the immediate crisis resolved and the city saved from Garaka's reign of terror, the Ghostbusters find themselves once again celebrated as heroes by the public, a dramatic reversal from the threats of being shut down that had loomed over them throughout the film. Walter Peck, who had spent much of the film as an antagonistic force pushing for the team's dissolution, is forced by circumstances and public opinion to support the team going forward. As part of this reversal, Phoebe is reinstated as an official member of the Ghostbusters, resolving the conflict that had been introduced at the very beginning of the film regarding her age and her removal from active duty. The film closes with the Ghostbusters returning to their familiar work, now expanded to include pursuing the various ghosts that escaped during the chaos of Garaka's attack, including the franchise's beloved Green Slime, Ghost Slimer, and the Mini Puffs, the small versions and replicated forms of the Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man that have become a fan favorite element of the rebooted Ghostbusters universe since their introduction in Afterlife. The cast assembled for Frozen Empire represents a deliberate blending of generations within the franchise. Paul Rudd returns as Gary Gruberson, Callie's boyfriend and a former Somerville teacher who has become an integral part of the Spengler family's life and the Ghostbusters operation. Carrie Coon reprises her role as Callie Spengler, the daughter of Egon Spengler, whose journey of reconnecting with her father's legacy formed much of the emotional core of Afterlife and continues to inform her character here. Finn Wolfhard returns as Trevor Spengler, Callie's son, while McKenna Grace reprises her role as Phoebe Spengler, the character whose arc forms the emotional spine of the film's narrative, exploring themes of belonging, grief, and growing into one's responsibilities. New to the franchise with this installment, Kumail Nanjiani takes on the role of Nadim Razmadi, the character whose family history with the Fire Masters and latent pyrokinetic abilities becomes central to the film's plot resolution. Patton Oswalt joins as Dr. Hubert Watsky, the New York Public Library research librarian and anthropologist whose expertise provides much of the film's mythological exposition regarding Garaka and the Fire Masters. Celeste O'Connor returns as Lucky Domingo, one of the young friends from the Somerville group who relocated to New York alongside the Spenglers, and Logan Kim returns as Podcast, the technically minded young man whose recording equipment becomes host to the escaped possessor ghost early in the film. Emily Allen Lind plays Melody, the ghost of a teenager killed in a fire who befriends Phoebe and whose secret allegiance to Goraka, followed by her eventual redemption, forms one of the film's key emotional and plot threads. James Acaster portrays Dr. Lars Pinfield, described as an Egon Spengler type inventor working at Winston's Research Center, representing a new scientific voice within the expanded Ghostbusters operation. The veteran cast members from the original films also return in significant roles. Bill Murray as Dr. Peter Venkman, Dan Aykroyd as Dr. Raymond Ray Stantz, Ernie Hudson as Winston Zeddemore, and Annie Potts as Janine Melnitz, all reprising characters they have played since 1984's original Ghostbusters. William Atherton also returns as Walter Peck, the character whose long-running antagonism toward the Ghostbusters, dating back to his role as an EPA inspector in the first film, continues into his new position as mayor in Frozen Empire. Beyond the principal cast, the film features several notable behind-the-scenes and supporting performances. Kevin Mangold and Ian White serve as puppeteers for Slimer and Garaka respectively, bringing a practical, tactile quality to these characters that complements the film's visual effects work, though the performers providing Garaka's voice were not credited. Shelby Young and Ryan Bartley provide uncredited voice work for the Mini Puffs, the tiny and replicated versions of the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, with Young returning to this role having previously voiced Mini Puffs in Afterlife. Additionally, John Rothman makes a cameo appearance as Roger Delacorte, the New York Public Library administrator, a character he originally played in the very first Ghostbusters film back in 1984, representing one of the more obscure but meaningful connections to the franchise's origins for longtime fans paying close attention. The development of Frozen Empire was shaped significantly by the legacy and aftermath of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Following that film's release in November 2021, Dan Aykroyd expressed enthusiasm about the possibility of the surviving members of the original Ghostbusters cast continuing to appear in future installments, suggesting interest in as many as 3 additional sequels. This public enthusiasm from one of the franchise's creators helped set the stage for Sony Pictures' announcement in April 2022 that a sequel to Afterlife was already in early development. In June 2022, Jason Reitman, who had directed Afterlife and was deeply connected to the franchise both creatively and personally as the son of original director Ivan Reitman, confirmed the project under the working title Firehouse. That same month, it was announced that this sequel would be set in New York City, marking a significant shift back to the franchise's original urban setting after Afterlife's small-town Oklahoma backdrop. Throughout the latter half of 2022, casting announcements began to trickle out. In October 2022, McKenna Grace confirmed she would be returning to reprise her role as Phoebe Spengler, a character who had become one of the breakout elements of Afterlife. The following month, Ernie Hudson revealed that he had already read a script for the upcoming film, indicating that development was progressing steadily. A significant shift in the project's creative leadership occurred in December 2022 when it was announced that Gil Kenan, who had co-written Afterlife and served as an executive producer, would take over as director from Jason Reitman. Reitman remained involved as a writer and producer, ensuring continuity in the creative vision even as directorial responsibilities shifted. This same announcement confirmed that Paul Rudd, Finn Wolfhard, and Carrie Coon would all be returning for the sequel, solidifying the core cast carried over from Afterlife. The casting expanded considerably in March 2023 when it was announced that Kumail Nanjiani, Patton Oswalt, James Acaster, and Emily Allen Lind had all joined the production. Emily Allen Lind's casting carries an interesting behind-the-scenes story, as her role as Melody was deliberately kept secret during pre-production. According to later interviews, Lind met with Reitman, Keenan, and casting director John Papsidera, but was reportedly not made aware of the specific nature of her role until shortly before filming began. This secrecy around her character makes sense in retrospect given the significant plot twist involving Melody's true allegiances, which the filmmakers clearly wanted to protect from early leaks or spoilers. An interesting piece of creative context comes from Kumail Nanjiani, who revealed that the filmmakers drew significant inspiration from the real Ghostbusters, the animated television series that ran from 1986 to 1991 and which many fans consider an essential part of the franchise's extended legacy. According to Nanjiani, the creative team behind Frozen Empire wanted to capture the feeling of a long episode of that animated series, suggesting a tonal and structural influence that helps explain some of the film's choices regarding its ensemble cast, its supernatural mythology, and its blend of comedy with genuinely eerie or threatening elements, echoing the way the animated series often balanced humor with darker, more elaborate supernatural threats. Principal photography for Frozen Empire began on March 20, 2023, with filming taking place across multiple locations including London, Vinesh Film Studios, and Shinfield Studios, all under the working title Firehouse. Eric Steelberg served as the film's cinematographer, bringing his visual sensibilities to a production that needed to balance the look and feel of contemporary New York City with the supernatural visual effects that define the franchise. On April 25, 2023, Ernie Hudson provided what amounted to confirmation that several of the original Ghostbusters actors, specifically Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and Annie Potts, would be reprising their classic roles in the new film. Aykroyd himself confirmed his return in June 2023, adding his voice to the growing anticipation surrounding the reunion of the original team alongside the newer cast members. During filming, the production received some unexpected attention when footage of a stunt being filmed in New York City was captured by Casey Neistat in a video he posted on June 7, 2023. This footage was incidentally documenting the effects of the 2023 Canadian wildfires that had blanketed New York City in smoke during that period, providing an unusual real-world backdrop to the production's New York filming. Principal photography ultimately wrapped on June 23, 2023, marking the completion of the film's primary shooting schedule after roughly 3 months of production across its various locations. The film's musical score represents a notable shift from its immediate predecessor. On January 18, 2024, it was confirmed that Dario Marianelli would compose the score for Frozen Empire, replacing Rob Simonsen, who had scored Afterlife. This assignment marked the second collaboration between Marianelli and director Gil Keenan, following their earlier work together on A Boy Called Christmas in 2021, suggesting a working relationship that Keenan wanted to continue into this larger project. Marianelli recorded his score at the Barbra Streisand scoring stage within the John Williams Music Building, located on the Sony Pictures Studios lot in Culver City, a location steeped in film scoring history that adds a certain symbolic weight to the recording of music for a franchise as musically iconic as Ghostbusters. Continuity with the franchise's musical legacy was maintained through the involvement of Peter Bernstein, son of Elmer Bernstein, who composed the score for the original 1984 Ghostbusters film. Peter Bernstein returned as a score consultant for Frozen Empire, having previously served in this capacity for Afterlife as well, ensuring that the musical DNA of the original film continued to inform the new score even as a different composer took the lead. The film also makes use of some of Elmer Bernstein's original musical compositions during certain scenes, creating a direct sonic link back to the franchise's origins. Beyond the score itself, the film's soundtrack includes several notable song selections. Most prominently, the theme song Ghostbusters, originally performed by Ray Parker Jr. for the 1984 film and one of the most recognizable pieces of movie music ever produced, is heard during the end credits of Frozen Empire, a choice that almost certainly serves as a deliberate nostalgic payoff for audiences after sitting through a film that deals with considerably heavier and more dramatic material than the original. Other songs featured in the film include Home on the Range, which was arranged specifically for the film by Kenan and Reitman, Melano by the artists Kaino and Jan Aroti, and Love is Strange by the duo Mickey and Sylvia. A song with its own long history in popular culture. An interesting piece of international promotional activity occurred on March 7, 2024, when the Japanese girl group Atarashi Gakko released a track titled Ghostbusters. Frozen Summer as a collaborative promotional effort with Sony Pictures Entertainment Japan. This kind of cross-promotional music release reflects the global marketing strategy employed for a major franchise film, recognizing the international appeal of the Ghostbusters brand and tailoring promotional content for specific markets, in this case Japan, where the group has a substantial following. The film's release timeline experienced some notable shifts before it ultimately reached theaters. Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was originally scheduled for release on December 20, 2023. However, the production was affected by the 2023 SAG-AFTRA strike, a major labor action that disrupted numerous Hollywood productions throughout that year. As a result of this disruption, the film's release was pushed back and rescheduled for March 29, 2024. Interestingly, this new date meant the film effectively took over the release slot originally intended for Sony Pictures animation Spider-Man. Beyond the Spider-Verse, illustrating how these strikes' effects rippled through release calendars across multiple productions and studios. The film ultimately had its world premiere in New York City on March 14, 2024, a fitting location given the film's setting and the franchise's deep connection to the city. It was then released theatrically in the United States on March 22, 2024, by Sony Pictures, releasing slightly ahead of its previously announced March 29 date. This premiere event in New York likely served as both a celebration of the film and a reminder of the franchise's roots, bringing cast members back to the city where the Ghostbusters story began on screen 4 decades earlier. Regarding home media and streaming arrangements, the film's distribution exists within a broader context established by deals Sony made back in April 2021. At that time, Sony signed agreements with both Netflix and Disney covering the rights to its film slate from 2022 through 2026, with these arrangements applying after each film's theatrical run and home media windows had concluded. Netflix secured exclusive Pay One Windows streaming rights, which typically constitutes an 18-month exclusive streaming period, and this arrangement covers Frozen Empire as well as the previous films in the Ghostbusters franchise. Disney meanwhile secured Pay Two Windows rights, meaning that after the Netflix exclusivity period concludes, the films would become available on Disney Plus and or Hulu, as well as potentially airing on Disney's linear television networks. This complex web of distribution rights reflects the increasingly intricate nature of film distribution in the streaming era, where theatrical releases are just one part of a much longer life cycle for a major studio film. In terms of physical and digital home release, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire became available for digital purchase and rental on May 7, 2024, relatively soon after its theatrical run had concluded. The film then received its physical media release on 4K Blu-ray, standard Blu-ray, and DVD on June 25, 2024, giving fans multiple ways to add the film to their collections in the formats they preferred. Financially, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire performed respectably, though its box office trajectory tells a story of a strong opening followed by fairly typical decline patterns for major studio releases. The film grossed a total of $202 million worldwide, broken down into $113.4 million from the United States and Canada and $88.6 million from international territories, against a production budget of $100 million. This represents a profitable outcome for the studio, though one that needs to be considered alongside marketing costs, which for films of this scale often rival or exceed the production budget itself. In its domestic release, the film opened alongside two other notable titles, Immaculate and Late Night with the Devil, both of which represented different corners of the horror and supernatural genre landscape that Frozen Empire itself occupies in a more family-friendly capacity. Prior to release, industry projections suggested the film would gross between $43 and $45 million during its opening weekend across 4,345 theaters, a wide release reflecting confidence in the film's commercial prospects. The film's actual performance closely tracked these projections. On its first day of release, the film earned $16 million, which included $4.7 million from Thursday night preview screenings. This preview total slightly topped the $5 million that Afterlife had earned in its own preview screenings, suggesting at least comparable, if not slightly stronger, initial audience interest compared to its predecessor. The film went on to debut with a $45 million opening weekend, a figure that places it between the opening weekends of two other entries in the broader Ghostbusters franchise, the 2016 all-female reboot, which opened to $46 million, and Afterlife, which opened to $44 million in 2021. This positioning of Frozen Empire's opening almost precisely between these two prior films is a notable data point for industry observers tracking the franchise's box office trajectory over time. The opening weekend performance was strong enough for Frozen Empire to top the box office for that weekend, and significantly, this success pushed the cumulative worldwide box office total for the entire Ghostbusters franchise past the $1 billion mark, a milestone that speaks to the franchise's enduring commercial viability across 4 decades and multiple different creative iterations. Despite this strong opening, industry analysis from outlets like Deadline Hollywood offered a more nuanced perspective on the film's commercial performance. While crediting Sony's marketing efforts for helping to boost the opening weekend numbers, this analysis also suggested that the franchise might perform even better commercially if future installments return to the focus that characterized the original 1984 film, namely what was described as wall-to-wall humor and reliance on big comedy stars. This kind of commentary reflects ongoing industry discussion about the tonal direction the rebooted Ghostbusters franchise has taken, with some observers feeling that the more dramatically weighted, ensemble heavy approach of Afterlife and Frozen Empire may not be fully capitalizing on what made the original film so beloved in the first place. The film's box office trajectory after its opening weekend followed a pattern of decline typical for major releases, though the specific competitive context matters for understanding these numbers. In its second weekend, the film earned $15. 7 million, representing a drop of 65% from its opening. This significant decline placed the film in second place for that weekend, behind the debut of Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire, another major franchise film that clearly captured a substantial portion of the available audience for blockbuster entertainment during that period. By its third weekend, Frozen Empire had fallen further to third place, earning $9 million, representing a 42% drop from the previous weekend. While these declines are not unusual for studio films, especially when facing competition from other major releases, they do illustrate the front-loaded nature of the film's commercial performance, with the bulk of its earnings coming relatively early in its theatrical run. Critical reception for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire was decidedly mixed and in some respects represented a low point for the franchise in terms of critical consensus. On Rotten Tomatoes, the review aggregation website, the film received a 42% positive rating based on 302 critics' reviews, with an average rating of 5.2 out of 10. The site's official critical consensus described the film as offering a certain amount of nostalgia-fueled fun for fans of the original, while also noting that a crowded cast and surprisingly serious tone prevent this sequel from truly sparking. This consensus captures two of the most commonly cited issues with the film among critics: the sheer size of its ensemble cast, which had grown considerably from the original films and even from Afterlife, and a tonal seriousness that some felt was at odds with what audiences expect from a Ghostbusters film. Notably, this 42% rating made Frozen Empire the lowest rated installment in the entire Ghostbusters franchise on Rotten Tomatoes, a distinction that places it below even films that have faced significant public controversy or backlash in the past. On Metacritic, which uses a weighted average system to aggregate critic reviews, Frozen Empire received a score of 46 out of 100 based on 50 critics, a score that the site categorizes as indicating mixed or average reviews. This score is broadly consistent with the Rotten Tomatoes figures, painting a picture of a film that elicited genuinely divided opinions among professional critics rather than a uniform negative or positive consensus.